Hey everybody, welcome into another edition of the Blitz. I am your host, Michael Barnaud, and today we're going to be having our first reaction to day one of the NFL Draft. It was a big day, lots of great moves were made. Some of the things I want to jump into right away. Big takeaways. One of the biggest things I loved about this draft was the top five. I loved every one of the top five picks. I feel like each one of them is a home run type of hit. Loved all of them. There were no Cleveland Farrell type picks that just left me scratching my head, wondering what are the Raiders doing. Although the Raiders did shock me again, but at least not in the top five. Another big takeaway: I really did not like the Packers' move to trade up and get Jordan Love for several reasons. The first is they didn't have to trade up to get him. All right, let's start there. They didn't have to trade up to get Jordan Love. They could have stayed right where they were, and he would have been available. The teams that were in front of them were not in the quarterback market. The Ravens wanted an inside linebacker. The Dolphins had already picked their quarterback. Well, it didn't make any sense. Why did they trade up to grab a guy who, I'll get to him in a second, but they didn't have to trade up in the first place. And they could have sat there, stayed at, I believe it was 29 or 30, and they still would have gotten their guy, and they would have gotten to keep their fourth-round pick. But instead, they gave away the fourth-round pick to the Dolphins. Look, I'm a Dolphins fan. I like it. Thank you. But they gave away their fourth-round pick to move up to get a guy that would have been available where they were. It's not like they jumped like 10 spots. They jumped three or four, over a bunch of teams that didn't need a quarterback in the first place. The other reason I don't like this move. Instead of going for a win-now mentality, they went for let's draft for the future. Right now. The Packers last season were one game away from the Super Bowl. Mind everybody. It's not like they were 8-8 or 9-7 or they didn't have, they had a mediocre or average season and they went this route. They were right on the doorstep. Which means that this team is in a position to win right now, possibly. This team is in a position to win right now, and you guys go and pick for the future? And then let's also get to Jordan Love. I don't love Jordan Love. I think he's got some tools, but he was very mistake prone when he was in college. He did not win an excess amount of games. And okay, yeah, neither of those things mean bust for sure, but I'm not sold on him. And nobody I know was sold on him. This move was one of the most puzzling of the first round. The Packers move to trade away their fourth-round pick to the Dolphins, jump up several spots, and grab a flawed player that is far from a sure thing. Far from a sure thing. So those are some thoughts on that. But getting to the picks, Joe Burrow to the Bengals, obviously a really great pick. I loved that one, but that was a foregone conclusion. Chase Young goes to the Redskins, fills a major hole there, and Jack Del Rio now has possibly a once-in-generation type pass rusher to go on his defense. Andrew Thomas goes to the Giants. This was the one of the top five I was the least in love with, but it does fill a need for the Giants. Jeff Okudah to the Lions. That, again, was a foregone conclusion. The Lions have to go get the top corner in the draft after losing Darius Slay in free agency. And then, lastly, my favorite pick of the top five, I'd say, up there is Tua Tagovailoa to the Dolphins. Dolphins fans finally have a shot at a franchise quarterback. Even if this falls through. Even if Tua ends up going to the league, can't stay healthy, or he just flat doesn't perform up to par and doesn't end up being the franchise quarterback, this was a pick the Dolphins had to make. It's a chance. The ceiling is simply too high. It's a chance the Dolphins organization had to make. And I'm glad they did it. They did not overthink this one. They did not think the room. They drafted their man, and now the Dolphins have a shot. There's actually legitimate buzz in Miami now. They might finally have a franchise quarterback, something the Dolphins haven't had since Dan Marino retired back in 1999. The closest thing we've had since then was Chad Pennington winning the Comeback Player of the Year award in 2008, and then was gone, and then immediately flared out after that. So major reason for excitement in Miami. Loved the pick of taking Tua Tagovailoa at 5. Herbert at 6 with the Chargers. Again, the Chargers, it has been speculated for months they would take a quarterback, and they came through on that. They ended up taking the quarterback because they have to here. If they didn't take Herbert, you're basically saying Tyrod Taylor's our guy, not just for this year, but for the year after that as well. I think that the organization really had no choice. They had to go with Herbert, even though I think Herbert is the least. I've said before, there's a major drop from the top 2 down to the next quarterback, and Herbert was the next guy. The next guy up, it was also very flawed. I don't love Herbert, but the Chargers had to take him. You had to take the best quarterback available because they need to get a franchise quarterback now that they shipped off Rivers. Next pick, the Panthers went with Derek Brown, the SEC factory for defensive lineman. They picked up Derek Brown from Auburn. Really like this pick. At the time, I speculated they might take Simmons just because I think Simmons is the overall better player, but Brown fits more of an immediate need for the Panthers. Last season, the Panthers were horrendous against the run. It was their main Achilles heel on defense. They could not stop the run game at all. And so even though they had Luke Kuechly, well, Kuechly just retired. So that is likely going to get even harder to do to hold up in the run game. And they made a great selection picking up the top defensive tackle in the draft. Derek Brown goes to the Panthers. So really liked that pick too. Moving forward for the Panthers, I think Matt Rule and company have a major piece to work with now. Speaking of pieces, the next piece with the Arizona Cardinals picked up the queen of chess pieces, Isaiah Simmons. If you think of like a chessboard, Isaiah Simmons is kind of the queen in today's NFL. You could play this guy in a lot of places and have him do well. I think he could hack it as a strong safety in the NFL if you really needed him to. I think he slots in more as a 4-3 outside backer, which the Cardinals run the traditional 4-3, and he will be an amazing player in that 4-3 outside backer slot. He's tailor-made for it. The size, the speed, the playmaking ability. I really loved Simmons. Cardinals got a steal at 8. I really thought that there were some people saying that the Cardinals have a need on the offensive line, and I said before that defense was the logical pick because your quarterback, Kyler Murray, is built to play behind a shoddy offensive line. So it was great that they picked up a defensive player to solve a problem where the only way to solve it is with talent. They got to get talented defensive players. And Simmons falling to them at 8, I don't think they even dreamed that was possible. So a great pick by the Cardinals, addressing a major area of need. That defense gave up the most yards in the NFL last year. He will help with that for sure. Next up, we had the Jaguars taking C.J. Henderson. And this was, I thought they would go with A.J. Terrell just because I said it last night on the stream that I think that Terrell has more size and length and ability as a number 1 corner. But Henderson's good too out of Florida. He was the other one. And the Jaguars had to take a corner here after losing Jalen Ramsey midway through last season. And then they shipped off A.J. Boy to the Broncos. I may have butchered that name, but anyway, they shipped A.J. Boy off to Denver, and he is now a Bronco. So they now had no elite level corners left on the roster. So they had to go get the best one available, and C.J. Henderson will certainly help them out with that. So Jaguars filled a need at corner. The Browns did what we all thought they would do. They're going to take a tackle, Jedrick Willis out of Alabama. Great athlete and very strong at his size. I thought this was going to be Wirfs. I think Wirfs from Iowa has been in the headlines the most of all the tackles, but after watching a lot of film on Willis, he's very good also. So fills a need for the Browns, and now Baker Mayfield will get the protection he needs to succeed in that offense. Now, if only they can get rid of Odell Beckham. But anyway, you move on to the next one. Jets take Mekhi Becton of Louisville. I was not a huge fan of this. I think the Jets, I really think that Becton is more of a ceiling type guy. I've heard rumors that he doesn't have great work ethic, which will be a huge problem in the NFL, or at least it can be. So there are some caution flags on this one. I'm not a huge fan of the Becton pick by the Jets, but the Jets had to go offensive line. It's widely known around the league that the Jets' offensive line is weak, and this, at least in theory, will help them address that. So they went with Becton from Louisville. The Raiders, Again, the Raiders have the weirdest draft picks. Henry Ruggs III. It was a wide consensus amongst everybody I read, everybody I'd listened to, that it was between Jeudy and Lamb who's the top receiver in this draft. The Raiders ended up probably figuring that they would get whoever hadn't picked CeeDee Lamb or Jeudy before them. They end up having their run of the litter. They could pick anyone they wanted, and they went with Henry Ruggs. Well, and while I'll say Ruggs is not a terrible player, Ruggs is more of a speed threat guy. And he was third on his own team in receiving yards this past season. Both Devontae Smith and Jerry Jeudy were in front of him. He was the third receiver at Alabama, third leading receiver on that team. And so this pick really shocked me, and I don't love it. I really don't. The only thing that I can come up with of why the Raiders took Ruggs instead of those other two is they probably think Ruggs is the fastest one, and so they said, well, we need someone that can stretch the field vertical. Yeah, that was the big problem for the Raiders last year is teams condensed the field on them, and they have great options in the slot and at tight end, both with Waller at tight end, and then you have Hunter Renfrow working the slot. So those two will have a lot more room to work if we can just get somebody to scare teams over the top and make teams have to defend the whole field. So that's the only thing I can think of. I still don't like the pick. I think they should have gone with Jeudy or Lamb. I think this was an example of Mike Mayock, the Raiders GM, outthinking the room. And so I don't love that pick. So, but we move on to the next one, and this was a steal. The Bucs had to be thrilled that they got Wirfs to fall to them at 13. We knew that we had a strong feeling. I don't just want to say we knew. We had a strong feeling the Buccaneers were going to take a tackle because they got to keep Brady protected. At this point in his career, he can't be running around or trying to dodge people. I mean, he's a statue back there. You got to make sure he's upright, and you got to get the line to protect him. And Wirfs, in my opinion, was the best tackle in the draft. They got him at 13. And if you were watching the draft last night, you would have seen that video of Wirfs jumping out of a pool. A 3 or 4 feet of water pool. He jumps out of the pool. That level of athlete out at tackle. So I'm impressed with him. I think he'll translate. I hope he does. And because I'm planning to root for Brady a lot this year for the Buccaneers, but the Bucs get a great pick with Tristan Wirfs out of Iowa. Really liked that pick. Next up, the 49ers. Again, another surprise, but not when you take a step back. Take a step back and look at it. The 49ers take Javon Kinlaw out of South Carolina, defensive tackle. I'd spoken with Chris Ferreira of the Barker Media, and we had discussed this, that I told him I thought the 49ers were weak on the interior of the defensive line. That was formed kind of the Achilles heel for them on defense was they're not great against the run. And part of that was a lack of players inside. They also shipped off DeForest Buckner to go to Indianapolis, and people thought, well, why would you ship Buckner off and then draft a defensive tackle in his place? And the answer is simple. One costs $21 million, the other one costs $4 million, and will be on a contract for years. So they're taking a chance that Kinlaw can come in and be a great player for them. He also fits kind of their mold up front, very more athletic defensive tackle. He kind of fits what they're trying to do on their defensive line. So the other reason, and the reason why it was a surprise, everybody, again, thought that the 49ers were going to go with a receiver. That was the biggest thing that stood out on their offense. They lost Emmanuel Sanders. They never had a great number one wideout to begin with. Jerry Jeudy and CeeDee Lamb both kind of fit that mold. But if you look at it, the receiver class this year was very deep. So they thought, let's get a tackle now because we want to draft a defensive tackle, a position that's not nearly as deep in this year's draft. And they knew they had another draft pick later on in the first round. They knew one of those great receivers will still be around, and sure enough, one of them was. So at the time, a head-scratcher, but you give it a minute, give it 5, 10, even a half hour, give it a little time, it makes more sense. So John Lynch knows what he's doing. A good pick in retrospect by the 49ers to draft Kinlaw from South Carolina. Broncos with Jerry Jeudy. This was a no-brainer. This was probably the biggest no-brainer of the middle of the round. You knew the Broncos were going to go for a big-time receiver and give their new quarterback a big-time piece to work with outside. They needed weapons. Sutton formed most of the receiving threat out of their wide receiving core. They have an athletic tight end. Noah Fant made a lot of plays for him. And now you add Jerry Jeudy to that. So that offense could be getting explosive next year. All these AFC West teams understand they play in a division with the Chiefs. They've got to be able to score points. And I think they all know that. And so that was also part of the reason behind this pick. And all those offenses, by the way, starting to look kind of scary out there. So next up, we had the Falcons with A.J. Terrell. This one, again, was the scouts and Mel Kiper, Todd McShay, all those guys. This was them outsmarting the film, is what this one was. I don't know how they got distracted enough to not put A.J. Terrell even in their best available when they made this pick. But Terrell always struck me as a very enticing prospect out of Clemson just because, as I've said before, his athleticism, he's a longer body, which it's very useful in defending those big number one receivers in the NFL these days. And the Falcons took him at number 16. I thought he was the best corner available. He was, in my opinion, possibly the top corner in the draft. I thought the Jaguars would take him at 9, but instead he falls to the Falcons at 16. So a really big pickup there for the Falcons. I'm glad that they didn't listen to anybody else. They didn't listen to the Mel Kipers of the world. They took the best cornerback, who I think is the best player of that group. So big pickup for the Falcons, filling a need there. Next one up, Cowboys. This is another one that I really don't like. It sells headlines. It helps the offense. Yes, it gives a lot of people reason for excitement. But this was a case where a team had to make the choice between do the right thing to win games or do the right thing to sell tickets. CeeDee Lamb will help them sell tickets. He makes the offense more explosive. He can work in the slot where they just lost Randall Cobb. But I don't understand why they did this. Like, safety was the biggest area of concern. And now the Cowboys don't get to pick until later in the second round. Will they get a great safety at that spot? Are they going to take a safety at all? Are they going to just act like they don't have a hole at that spot? They also needed a corner. They lost Byron Jones, who was a lockdown corner. I don't care what anyone says about his lack of interceptions. It's because the guys he's covering are never open, people. It's kind of like Darrelle Revis. He didn't have a lot of picks in his prime because the guys he's covering are never open. But anyway, so the Cowboys took CeeDee Lamb, Mike McCarthy, an offensive coach. Not that surprising in retrospect. They want their offense to do well. But another reason I don't like it is because Dak Prescott is an average passer of the football. He's average at throwing the ball. So what does it matter going to grab another great receiver? They need to get their defense figured out. But we segue into the next pick. Dolphins take Austin Jackson. Again, love this pick. You took Tua Tagovailoa first in the top 5. So now you got to take the tackle to protect him. They get Austin Jackson out of USC. Really great pick. So a great 1-2. Dolphins starting to slowly build up that offense. And the other great thing is having Fitzpatrick on the team right now is that he can play the games right now, and Tua doesn't have to play right away. He can play, halfway through the season next year. He's got time. You have time as a medical staff and as a coaching staff to make sure he's healthy and fully healthy, or as healthy as he's going to get before he ever, takes the field as a Dolphin. So really like that pick to take Austin Jackson, protect your quarterback. Never a problem with the tackle position. So, and one thing I want to comment on in this first round is it was really telling seeing who was picked. It tells you the direction of the NFL right now. Lots of tackles, quarterbacks, and cornerbacks. Quarterbacks, cornerbacks, and tackles. It seems like those are the positions that everyone is saying we've got to get good there. If we're not good there, then we are going to have a hard time succeeding in the modern NFL. So I think that speaks volumes about today's NFL and how you need to win in it, or who you need to get from a personnel standpoint. And speaking of corners, the Raiders took Damon Arnett, another guy who was a surprise first-round pick. Most guys I know didn't have him go until the second round. I was never that impressed with him either, but Raiders liked him enough to take him at 19, and they needed corners, so it was good to see that at least Mayock didn't outthink that one. Take a corner and fill that role, because the Raiders last year were abysmal at that spot. Pass defense was the biggest problem for the Raiders last season, and Arnett should help them shore that up. Jaguars take K'Lavon Chaisson out of LSU. The Raiders must be transitioning into a 3-4 defense, because Chaisson does not strike me as a 4-3 defensive end. He's more of a 3-4 outside linebacker that can do a lot of things. That's one thing I like about him, is he's versatile. At LSU, he did a lot of things for them. He could get coverage. He rushed the passer well. He's a great athlete, and he's strong. He can do a lot of things for you. So I like the Raiders pick, the Jaguars pick. Now they get to pair him up with Josh Allen on the other side. That gives you two young, talented players on the edge. So I have to believe Jaguars are transitioning to 3-4 with that pick. Next up, we have the Eagles taking Jalen Reagor. Matt Rule said that he has nightmares still about Jalen Reagor from TCU. And the Eagles did not have great wide receiver depth. Alshon Jeffrey can't stay healthy. And they had to go with a receiver. And so that pick, I'm not absolutely in love with it, but it fills a need again. Vikings take Justin Jefferson. They had to, after the departure of Stephon Diggs, they needed to fill the spot of getting another receiver to take some pressure off. A lot of people thought, some Vikings fans who were on the stream last night thought that Jefferson was not the right pick. They should have gone corner, which they did. They probably liked Gladney all along, who they picked later on, and they knew he would be available. So they were like, let's get the guy who a lot of teams like, and let's get him right now. So Jefferson to the Vikings. I like the pick, even though lots of Vikings fans don't, or at least they didn't at the time. Next up, Chargers. This was an awesome pick. I love it. Kenneth Murray out of Oklahoma. He was number 2 on my middle linebacker board. That's just because of my ratings, where I saw him. But I love Kenneth Murray as a football player. I think he really does fit the modern mold of the middle linebacker in the 21st century NFL scheme. I think he really fits it. He's big, but he's a super athlete at that size. And they can move him into the middle right now, and he can play next to Denzel Perryman. I feel bad for Drew Tranquill, the linebacker out of Notre Dame, who was playing at that spot last year. I think he's going to see his role reduced. He will go to a backup, and Kenneth Murray will take the starting job. But that was the big hole they had to fill on defense. The Chargers defense has a chance now, I think, to be all-time great, possibly, depending on how that pick goes. If Kenneth Murray becomes the type of player they envision, they now are weak nowhere. They are strong across the board. They have the athletes to run with Kansas City on offense. They got the pass rushers to get after them. I think if the Chiefs are looking out at the division and they're looking at the team that can challenge them the most, it has to be the Chargers. So, love the pick at 23 by the Chargers. Not a huge fan of Anthony Lynn, as Brandon from the Barker knows, but I love this pick, and I think they hit their first round almost out of the park. I give them like an A-. Saints take Cesar Ruiz. Saints were in a position they could just take the best player available, and they figured that we need a center, so they took Ruiz from Michigan, and that was kind of a surprise to me. I thought they might take a middle linebacker because the inside backer they have now, Kiko Alonso, coming off his 3rd ACL tear. So I was a little surprised, but not the worst thing. Again, if Alonso makes a full recovery, you can get by with that. Plus, he's a middle linebacker, not the most pressing need in the world for that team that's already great against the run and already has a lot of physical players. So, best player available, they took Ruiz from Michigan, and now the 49ers with the next pick finally addressed the receiver position. Ayuk out of Arizona State. It was good to see the Niners actually address the elephant in the room. And then the Packers, I just spoke about that. I hate the Jordan Love pick, at least to move up for him, and I don't like the fact that they took him. I think they should have gone with Higgins from Clemson. They should have gone with Thaddeus Moss maybe from LSU. Just somebody that can make plays. Give Aaron Rodgers a playmaker. As I said before, they are in a position they need to win now. They can win now. And they chose to say, let's go for the future when they just came off the NFC Championship game. It doesn't make sense. You add it up, it doesn't make sense. The Seahawks, Jordan Brooks. I really like this pick too. I thought they might go Xavier McKinney at safety, but they went with Brooks. And it's a good pick. He adds physicality, speed, and physicality to that linebacking core. Brooks was a very explosive player out of Texas Tech, and the Seahawks knew they had to go defense. That was their Achilles heel last season. It wasn't that they can't score. They can score on anybody. They just can't stop anybody. And so Brooks was the pick there. And I like the pick. I'd give him about a B+ on that one. Ravens took Patrick Queen. I don't like Queen. The Ravens knew they had to address inside linebacker Josh Bynes. And the only one you can really think of that is a legit starter in the NFL, probably LJ Fort. But there's no question that the hole on the Ravens defense was inside linebacker. last season. It showed up in the playoff game against the Titans, so they had to address it. They took Queen. I personally think they should have taken Malik Harrison. I think Queen is overrated. He's an example of scouts falling in love with one final game and just a 40 time and all that sort of thing. I think Queen, again, plays more like a safety at inside linebacker, so I think he's overrated. So I don't love the pick, but the Ravens did address a need, taking Queen. Titans took Isaiah Wilson at tackle. This signals to me, all right, Wilson going to the Titans. This signals to me that the Titans are still in the Jadeveon Clowney sweepstakes, because if they weren't, they would have gone edge here for sure. But instead, they went with Wilson to replace Jack Conklin, who just left and went out to Cleveland. And Conklin will now pair up with Jedrick Willis from Alabama to form the bookends for the Browns. But the fact that this, like I said, this pick tells me that the Titans are still thinking of signing Clowney. They must be. Or they're going to address the edge with their next pick, probably with A.J. Epinesa or the kid from Penn State. We'll see. But the Dolphins, this was the least, I was in love with this one, the least of the Dolphins' first-round picks. Noah Igbenogene, I think it is. I think I'm pronouncing that right. But anyway, they went with this corner out of Auburn. They say he's the fastest DB in the country. That might be true, but it's not all about just being a straight line speed in the NFLs. But we'll see on that one. I don't honestly know a ton about him. When they first announced him, I was like, who? But I'll have to learn a little more about him before I can judge that pick, honestly. But I don't love that one right now. Even from the film I did see, I don't love him. So Vikings then took Jeff Gladney to address their cornerback spot, which was great. They needed to address it. They shipped off their top 3 corners from this past season. Great pick there. And then the Chiefs obviously took a Swiss Army knife for their backfield. He fits great with their offense and what they want to do, how they use their running backs. Clyde Edwards-Helaire out of LSU, a solid pick by the Chiefs. I thought they might go DeAndre Swift and get more of a runner, but Edwards-Helaire is actually a great addition to that offense. He fits well with what they do. So that was the first round. A couple things to address moving forward. Looking ahead, the Rams don't pick until the 52nd overall in the draft. But they do get 2. They have 2 picks in this first round. In the second round. The Rams have 2 picks. And you see here that Rams are paying for front-loading the roster in the last 2 years to try and win right now and giving away a bunch of draft picks to do so. Now is when the starving time is going to happen for the Rams. They get 2 picks in the second round, but they didn't have 1 first-round pick. Cowboys, are they going to address the safety spot? Will the Cowboys finally address the safety spot? The bad news for the Cowboys is they don't pick until later in this second round. They don't get to pick for a while. So I doubt Xavier McKinney is going to fall that far. There was a widespread belief that McKinney would be off the board in the first round. I think he will. I don't think there's any chance he falls to them at later on in the second round. I don't think so. So that's the question, though. Do the Cowboys address the safety spot finally? We'll see on that. And the next thing up, the Patriots. I think the Patriots are going to take Jake Fromm. I think Jake Fromm fits the mold of a Patriot quarterback. I think they will take him. I could be wrong, but Fromm is everything that you want in a quarterback in the NFL. I think he is underrated. I think he's very underrated. People don't love his size. I don't think they love his arm. But I was impressed with Fromm's performance against Alabama in the games he played them. And he was a winner. He won the vast majority of the games he played at Georgia. Yes, he played for a great head coach, but Jake Fromm is a smart, heady football player, makes smart decisions with the ball. I really like him coming out of Georgia. I think he's underrated. Whoever takes him is not going to regret it. Next thing up, Dolphins. They have 2 second-round picks. Dolphins are shaping up to have a massive draft right now. I am really excited to see what the Dolphins can do with the rest of their draft. They have 2 picks here in the second round, and I believe they have, I think 6 or so after that. But they've got a very solid draft. They could really make some hay here. They've already had a good draft, in my opinion. Even if they were to stop all the picks right now, I would say the Dolphins won the draft. I would say they would. Not just from how many picks they had, but because of who I think they got with those picks. I really love the Dolphins draft so far. We go on to the next, and do the Colts take a quarterback? Will the Colts decide to take a Jake Fromm, a Jacob Eason, one of these 2 guys left who I think is really great? I don't know if the Colts are necessarily going to do that. That is something to watch, though. because this is a year they signed Phillip Rivers to a 1-year deal. I have a hard time believing Rivers has more than 1 year left in the tank, and he's on a 1-year deal. So I think they're probably in a wait-and-see mode. So I don't think they will, but I think it's a question worth asking. Will the Chargers take a quarterback? Again, I don't think they're going to, but it's something worth pondering. You clearly don't think that your other guy's the answer, Jacoby Brissett. You clearly don't think he's the answer. And Phillip Rivers is on his last legs in the league. So do they address it? We will see. And now the Packers don't get to pick until number 62. After moving up to take Jordan Love, they don't get to pick again until 62. Will there be any top-level receivers left? I'm sure Moss might be there as a tight end, but will there be any high-level receivers left by the time they get a chance to pick? Will they get to? And also, I would love to see the conversation between Matt LaFleur and Aaron Rodgers after this draft. I mean, you could have heard a pin drop everywhere when they did that. I mean, because that was clearly okay, Aaron, now you're on the clock. Like, your time here is clearly limited, and this pick says that. And so that's going to be a very interesting locker room. I can't express how much I hated the Packers' first round, but those are my initial reactions, and looking ahead, some things to look for. We will see what happens tonight, but thank you for tuning in to this next edition. I will release another one after the whole draft is over, kind of give an overview on all the teams and how I think they did. But let's all enjoy the draft. Stay safe, and we'll see you again soon. This has been another edition of The Blitz. I'm your host, Michael Barnaud. Take care of yourselves.